Hi, everyone. My name is Ahmad Wani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of One Concern. And by the way, if you guys have questions, please feel free to submit them, and we'll take them at the end. Over the last 12 months, US corporates have experienced around $100 billion in uninsured business interruption losses, primarily triggered by weather events. Now, just think about that. And now, in the same 12 months, every company, every corporate, every asset owner, every asset manager, every bank in the US which did a climate risk disclosure for physical risk got a green report card. And at the bottom of the report card is one of the audit firms stamped saying, no materiality, right? So there is a reconciliation gap today of $100 billion between actual impacts of climate change and climate risk versus what we are able to measure/disclose. Now, if you look at these five properties on the left, none of these are in the flood zone, right? The blue is the actual flood zone. So through kind of conventional technology, which is what we call as GIS technology, where we take a flood zone, we upload our locations, we check whether we are in a flood zone or a wildfire zone, hurricane zone, et cetera. All of them will get that green light. But actually, if you actually were to consider their surrounding environment, their power outage propensities, their supply chain, their customers and employees, none of them are anywhere close to a green check mark. In fact, their actual losses in the last event tell you a completely different story, right? And so status quo is a large corporate, let's say they have 10,000 locations, uploads all their locations, and invariably they get answers like, hey, only one location is in the flood zone today, and only 3 will be in the flood zone 30 years from now. And then the auditor asks them, do you guys have insurance for these 3? And they're like, yeah, yes. And then they get that green check mark, right? And actually, and this is not just a large corporate. In fact, 90% of US commercial facilities today are not in any high hazard zone. This number becomes more than 99.6% when you consider the Fortune 500. The Amazons of the world and the FedExes of the world do not build in flood zones. But 95% of them have their businesses impacted because of externalities, while their buildings are not touched by a drop of water. These include power outages, supply chain disruptions, employees and customers being affected. So the business inside the facilities is affected while the buildings are just fine. Today, we are able to, through technology, data, and AI, capture around 90% and account for around 90% of that reconciliation gap. So, we had our work cut out for us, which is the risk is in the infrastructure, right? It's not just the facilities, but actually the broader infrastructure. And so we started to actually go and map this out, right? We started with small cities where we started to collect this data. What does that crane look like? When was it upgraded? What about that power line? What about that substation? What about that highway? And at some point, we were able to gather so much data that we were able to train an AI model on how cities are built. So essentially, just like ChatGPT trains and then generates synthetic language, we are able to generate synthetic infrastructure data. And we were able to start to fill the data gaps within smaller cities to begin with, where we were generating an adjacent street. And then we went on to generating an adjacent city. And at some point, just like there is a moment when you first are comfortable driving to your home or driving to your school when you first get your driving license, and at some point you learn how to drive. And that moment happened for us last year when we were able to train AI on how cities are built and essentially generate a synthetic digital graph mapping out every power line, every transportation network, for the entire US. Now that you have this graph, what do you do with it? So you hit this graph with any kind of disturbance, whether it is happening in the next 3 days or whether it's happening in the next 30 years, right? And now you see ripple effects, second, third, fourth order effects. Now we measure risk in one single language, time. Everybody wears a wristwatch, so everybody understands the concept of lost time. So essentially, now, for the first time, you have millions of data points in terms of power downtime, highway downtime, bridge downtime, coming to each facility. And now you, instead of telling a bagel shop, you are in a 250-year flood zone, and they don't really know what to do about that, or how to even grasp that information and translate that to impact to business. For the first time, they are able to get information like, over the next 1 year, you're going to have 10 days of no power and 3 days of no foot traffic. That suddenly is very actionable information, perhaps not for the bagel shop, but for a bank which has provided them a credit line. Now, if you replace the bagel shop, same address, with a data center, nobody's visiting. But they do require thousands of gallons of water per day to cool the data center, the servers. And so they are worried about reliability of water. And so for each industry, we are able to measure, quantify crucial downtime metrics, which then ultimately are linked to cash flow. So essentially, now that you have, for the first time, linked physical risk to time, and then translate that to cash flow, what can you do with it, right? So these are some cases where, this is 1,000 commercial mortgages in the Miami region. So we took flood and wind risk on these commercial mortgages, and what we were able to plot was the probability of default for these mortgages. Now what we see here is if you took the direct property into account, or if you took a forward-looking climate model, but just the direct property in green into account, you don't have much defaults. But now if you take the dependencies into account, those increase. And by the way, facilities, as I mentioned, are already insured. So this is the insurance when you apply insurance on top of it, right? Insurers only cover your building. Once your building gets affected, that's when they will give you a little bit of business interruption. But that doesn't really happen, as we discussed. So essentially, this becomes this in 5 years, and this in 10 years. So essentially, this is that $100 billion of unpriced risk today, hidden in plain sight, right? So I wanted sort of everybody to be able to experience this. And so if you guys are interested, whoever sort of is able to point their phone and at this QR code, and just press next, what you'll be able to sort of see is you can pick one location or one company name, and you'll be able to actually simulate this digital graph for one location. And it'll show you those hidden risks which are today not priced. Questions?
I have one to start us off. How do we model or account for possible AMOC collapse?
Sorry?
How do we model or account for possible AMOC collapse?
What is that? Sorry.
I don't. That's what's submitted. Anagram for, yeah. Anybody who submitted it? No? Okay. Okay. I don't know. That's all we got.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Any questions on the demo?
Questions come through me on the online. Yeah,
okay.
I ask them. Yes.
Oh.
So that was the one that we had. So yeah, that's it. You can wrap it up.
Thank you.
Yeah.